Welcome to my life. I'm a mother to 8 children, 6 biological and 2 adopted. I have a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, a 9, 8, 4, 2, and I have a 6-year-old son who is in heaven today. I've dedicated 14 years to raise my children free from abuse and neglect. And I'm proud to say I have 8 strong, God-fearing children. They're my complete life. In 2010, I attended a funeral where I found a 6-week-old baby left in a tent. That's her sitting in my lap. Her mother left her there 3 days prior. She says she'd rather her be dead. A few months later, that mother dropped her 2-year-old son off. That's him sitting in my husband's lap. When she left, I put him in the bathtub and discovered that his body was covered in scars, burns, bruises, and an entire handprint. I contacted Texas CPS and took him to the hospital, and I held that 2-year-old boy while he kicked and screamed the 16 hours it took to document his body. It was learned that the 2-year-old boy was a sexual assault victim, and he's left with a lifelong STD. Texas CPS promised to help. Instead, they did a home inspection, they interviewed my children, and they walked away. That little boy, he rocked in corners, he shook around men, he hid under his bed and in his closets. He was found to have a butter knife under his pillow. And on one occasion, he tied a belt around his neck and tried to kill himself. I called CPS and I told him what he was doing. And a social worker said, "I'm not obligated to help him. We only help Texas children, and abuse didn't happen here." I tried to file charges, and no one here would help. But I met a man, a detective in New Mexico. He held 5 charges, and the mom was arrested. Sadly, she was found incompetent to stand trial, and nobody ever went after the 8 men who sexually assaulted him. She admitted to locking him in closets, beating him, letting 8 men sexually assault him while she went off gambling, and she admitted to feeding him feces. She's free, and she's a mom to 6 children now. I entered my son in the behavioral health clinic, and he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, reactive attachment disorder, a mood disorder, and anal warts. Our church welcomed them into our family and helped add on to my home so that I could adopt them. Today, that little girl, she's 4 years old, and she's my daughter. But sadly, on March 22nd, 2013, my son passed away in my arms. I held him as he took his last breath. I tried CPR to save him. It's a pain that's unbearable at times. I miss him every day. He grew into this little boy who loved life. He loved singing for God. And at times he has found it church dancing for God. He loved to snuggle. And he used to carry this giant dinosaur and chase his sister in the house. And he would proudly tell everybody, "That's my big Bubba." The day he died, and ambulances came, they noticed that he was a small kid and his scars all over him. They called the police. I signed a search warrant so they could come in my house because I had nothing to hide. This lady came in. She told me she was a police detective, and she started asking questions. And then she revealed that she was a Texas social worker, and that I had no choice, that she was taking my 7 kids. I gave her his records, medical records, detectives' phone numbers. It didn't matter. My aunt volunteered to take my kids. A preliminary autopsy came out 2 days after his death. And although CPS reported to the media that my son was abused and starved, that his autopsy revealed there was no signs of abuse prior to my home, that he only had abuse from his biological family. It revealed that he had food and water in every part of his system. Then why wasn't my kids returned? On the 25th, CPS contacted my aunt and told him that was going to be my first hearing date and nobody could come. It's a closed hearing. She fully intended to get on the stand and lie under oath and tell my judge that I had no family, although my aunt already took placement. The social worker promised me that she will guarantee my kids would never return to me. CPS refused to allow my kids to go to their brother's viewing. At the day of the funeral, CPS came, and as we was hugging people, our friends and family, they took my children and put them in their car and took them to foster care. No time for someone to comfort them. Instead, they allowed strangers to do it. On May 20th, I was arrested for injury to a child by omission. And on June 25th, I was arrested on the same charge. Twice. The medical examiner came forward in October, and he said that my son's autopsy was altered. He didn't rule my son's death homicide. That my son didn't die from starvation. And he said that 2 Texas social workers went to his office and told him that Buddy never suffered abuse prior to my care, that there was never a Texas CPS case, that my adoption was fake, and I was a pathological liar. The same social worker who lied under oath, the same social worker found sitting outside my home when the investigation was over. The same social worker who showed up my visits and took my 1-year-old son out of my hand and told me she's going to take him to his mommy. In December, all charges were dropped. but CPS refused to return my kids for 4 more months. In April, my kids were court-ordered back into my care. But sadly, my 7 children, who never once suffered abuse in my home, returned victims. 3 of my kids were sexually assaulted. My 13-year-old was held down, beaten, and sexually violated for 9 months. All 7 suffered medical neglect. CPS never put in the court records that my children were making outcries of sexual assault. Instead, they felt it safe to leave them there. I have emails where my attorney contacted them and told them what my son's allegations were, and they didn't do anything. I have a tape recording of my son talking to a Texas social worker and telling her about his meetings. She did nothing. They felt my kids were better off in a foster home where they were being beaten and violated than in a home they never once suffered abuse. Although my innocence was proven, CPS is still in our lives. Until October, they still have custody of my kids, although they live with me. Texas law says you have 48 hours to report abuse and neglect, or you can be held responsible. My social workers waited 9 months. And to this day, my 13-year-old's allegations have not been fully investigated. I have pictures of the day he returned and bruises all over his front and backside. Why isn't there accountability here in Texas? My social worker, she looked at me and she said, I'm protected by Texas law. I will never be held responsible for anything. She wasn't lying. She has immunity and she knows it. Where was the justice for my 2-year-old son who was sexually assaulted by 8 men and who was found to have the HIV antibody? Where's the justice for my 7 children who were forced out of my care for 377 days? All along, my social worker knowing I was fully innocent. I had proof that she knew 8 days after his death of his HIV status. I have proof that she lied under oath. I've asked for a full investigation, and Judge Specia promised that. I've spoken twice in Austin, and legislator members said what happened to my family is criminal, only to get a half-investigated case where he never once talked to me or my kids. And this week, finally, the Office of an Attorney General came and spoke to me. And I was told I will never know the findings. Why not? Those are my 7 kids. And these workers should be held accountable for 377 days that was robbed from me with my kids. Held responsible for not reporting the abuse. 17 months of hell has been given to us. Our home was surrounded with gasoline twice. 14 articles about my family. Our windows busted out. child killer spray painted on her home. All along, we were innocent parents. My kids are safe. They're back home with me. And on October 2nd, I will regain full custody of them. But sadly, nobody's willing to stand up and say that my 7 children matter. They won't stand up and hold these social workers responsible. I have a strong faith, and that's what's held us together the 17 months. And although she may be right, I serve a God who will hold her accountable. But how many more families will face what we have faced? How many more families will have their children removed for a paycheck? How many more children will be left in a foster home to endure physical and sexual abuse and severe emotional abuse? Children are supposed to matter to everybody. My kids are my whole life. I will fight for accountability. I will fight for the jobs of all social workers involved. And I will fight for accountability of what my children had to endure. If you hold a power to change laws, stand up and fight for the kids who don't have a voice. They deserve that. They deserve to be happy, safe, and loved. This agency was built to protect them. But Texas CPS failed my 7 children and my deceased son. I miss my son every day. But I have his pictures and his memories. And I know that he knew true love before he died. And I'll see him again. It's time to move forward. It's time to get our life back in order. Sadly, we had to wait 2 more months. And sadly, my kids had to be forced to be talked to by the very social workers who hid their abuse. I thank God for all my friends and family. They stuck by us and stood for us knowing that we were innocent. That means a lot. There's got to be change here in Texas and all across the world. And it's going to take families standing up for what's right. And it's going to take lawmakers to stop pretending to care and really do something. These kids deserve somebody to be their voice. They're great kids, and I love them with all my heart.